Hi. So just as yesterday, I'll begin casting sacred space with a candle, and I'll burn a little bit of cedar. Just gonna consciously cleanse my chakra system and the space around me. Welcome everyone, welcome, welcome. As you know, today we will be discussing the sacral chakra. So for those of you who were not here yesterday, I just want to do a brief review before we move into today's topic. So the chakras are a vibrational energy system in the body. There are many chakras, since our energetic body does reach out in about 3.5 feet in every direction. We have a very wide energy field. So the chakras, we're going to talk about 7 major chakras in the body today. Yesterday we discussed the root chakra, which is at the base of our spine. It has to do with grounding and the structure of our lives and our beliefs and our body. And then today we're moving into the sacral chakra, which is located in the pelvic bowl of our hip complex. And it's important for us to keep this energy system balanced and nourished, because each chakra is kind of like a window. And we look through all of these different windows throughout our life, depending on what it is that we're experiencing. And so we want to keep these windows open and have a clear view of what's going on so that we can self-actualize and ultimately remember our true nature as divine spirit beings. Okay. So the sacral chakra in Sanskrit is called Svadhisthana. Svadhisthana. That's Svadhisthana. Svadhisthana. And the color of this chakra is orange. So like I said, the chakras are like a spectrum of light, like the rainbow. The root chakra beginning at red, the sacral at orange. And imagine that there's just an orange light down below the navel, sitting in your pelvic bowl. This is where the sacral chakra is. Its element is water. So water is our emotional self, our senses, how we're really feeling and experiencing our lives. And the developmental stage of this chakra begins around 6 months and kind of moves through our toddler years to about the age of 4. So all of the chakra development overlaps. It's not just like one rigid time period. They're all kind of developing one on top of the other. They're building blocks essentially. And the anatomical connection to this chakra is in our pelvic space. So of course we have our hips, our hip bones, hip sockets, our bladder, appendix, the pelvis, the lower vertebrae of our back, so like the lumbar spine, essentially. If you have some like L4, L5 pain or damage, which a lot of us do, that's connected to the sacral space, which I find extremely interesting because I'm someone who suffers from low back pain. It's also connected to our large intestine, and then of course our sexual organs. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So before we dive into the discussion part of this, let's begin with a pranayama, just kind of breath work exercise. So you can do this standing, or if you're in a seat, that's fine. Just sit up nice and tall so that the spine is lengthened. Your hands rest on your knees, and just close your eyes. And let's take an exhale through the mouth. A deep inhale through your nose. And a big exhale. Now seal the lips. Breathe in and out through your nose, activating Ujjayi Pranayama. Just take a few breaths here to drop into sacred space. And then just bring your hands down to your hips, creating an upside down triangle shape with your thumbs and your index fingers. And just place it right below the navel. Just breathe into this pelvic space. Visualize your pelvic bowl. Imagine a bowl just sitting here in the hips. Imagine the top, the rim of the bowl around the hip bones. And imagine the bottom of the bowl. And then all of the space that rests within this space, within this pelvic bowl. And then imagine that there's a ball of orange light resting here in this space, illuminating the pelvic bowl. This healing light nourishes all of your organs here, nourishes this space, the emotional self. From this space, we will feel and experience this discussion today as we activate the sacral chakra energy. And then reach your hands up and over your head and draw the hands to your heart center for your Anjali Mudra. We'll sing the Bij mantra of the sacral chakra, which is VAM, V-A-M. We'll sing it together. Inhale. Just take another deep breath, honoring the space within. And let your eyes gently flutter open. Okay, so welcome everyone to Sacred Space. The intuitive message that I'd like to share with you today of the sacral chakra is intimacy. Intimacy. What is intimacy and why is it important? Well, intimacy is directly connected to all that is sacred and divine. Intimacy is the vehicle, our direct link to our own divinity, to the divinity that exists within our world, because everything in our lives is sacred. if we let it be, if we experience our lives from this space of intimacy. When we invite intimacy into each moment of our life, we experience what is divine. Everything becomes more personal. It takes on more meaning. And from this space, we live more deeply. Okay? We live with more appreciation of everything that is, and we heal. So in order to experience intimacy, we have to be present. So that's where we'll begin this conversation today, is on presence. So yesterday we talked about an interference that I believe has more or less infected our mind and our sacral or our chakra system. And for the sake of keeping things simple, we'll call this system of interference society. Okay, so society encourages us to not be present. It invites us into distraction. It invites us into addiction. It invites us into disassociation from our body and from what we're experiencing. Also, trauma is real. And when we experience something that scares us, we naturally want to escape it. So, and that's a whole other conversation. But for today, I want to focus on the importance of moving more deeply into the present moment with the awareness that these things are interfering with that relationship. Okay, and what's so important when we're doing sacral chakra work is for us to be gentle with ourselves. We live in a harsh world. And when it comes to our own spiritual practices and our own self-care, it's so essential that we are being gentle. I have learned that through my own healing and my own work. So, how do we become more present? How do we live our lives more intimately? Of course, we have yoga as a beautiful practice, a somatic experience where we are asked to step into our physical body and experience from that place, which can be very new for some. For me, moving into my yoga practice was very scary, having an eating disorder and my own, physical trauma and pains that I'd experienced through my life. I had learned that my body was an unsafe place. And I'm sure many of you have also had that experience, unfortunately. So part of this intimate relationship is relearning that the present moment is a safe place, that being in our bodies is a safe place. So before we can even really move into a place of intimacy, we have to start with these self-care practices of getting to know ourselves. And we did a little bit of that work yesterday with the root chakra, just kind of getting clear about where we're operating from helps us when we move into these spaces of healing. So being intimate means that we have to be willing to be vulnerable. We have to be willing to be wrong, to get our feelings hurt, right? So being vulnerable and being present are two very important pieces to our own intimacy. So this is where we move into relationships. Okay, so the sacral chakra is very much a part of, it's an operating space for our relationships. So our relationships have to be intimate in order for them to truly be healthy. So this always brings me back to social media. I love that I get to sit here and be with you all and speak to you about topics that I'm passionate about. I realize that we're all just doing the best that we can given the circumstances of the world right now. But we can't deny how different, how intimate it would be if all of us were sitting in a circle right now, seeing each other, feeling each other's energy, and having this conversation about intimacy. Okay, so intimacy is another layer of experiencing. We have to go a bit deeper. Okay, and so social media can only bring us so deep into these relationships. So right now, maybe we can't be around other people. So we begin with ourselves. We can begin with our relationship with ourselves, with nature, with God or our higher power, with our pets. Okay, so we don't have to have other people in our life necessarily to practice intimacy. But in this sacral space, everything around us becomes a mirror where we can learn if we're willing to look. So, intimacy, for most people, I think the first thing we kind of jump to in our mind is sex and pleasure and orgasm. Which, yes, of course, those are a huge piece of intimacy. Our intimacy is a huge piece of those practices. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the discussion. But I want to expand this concept of intimacy into a wider umbrella and kind of talk about how other ways that intimacy can be practiced in our life. So intimacy is also laughter. Intimacy is playful. We can experience intimacy with a friend, in nature. You know, there are so many different ways to experience intimacy. It's not just with your partner or your lover. It's also experienced through trust and honesty. It's experienced through communication and language, so how we're speaking to people and with what depth we're speaking with. A lot of us live our lives from a space that's very superficial because we're afraid to be intimate. And why are we afraid of this intimacy? I believe it's because we're afraid of rejection. We're afraid that someone will tell us that we are wrong, that we are not enough. And this fear begins to live within us instead of intimacy. And now I wanted to take a moment to kind of recreate this fear narrative, because we don't have to fear intimacy. And this goes back to our root chakra, and this is how the chakras start to work like building blocks. Because we learned in I'm going to back up. When we have the choice to be intimate with someone, and we choose not to be because we're afraid of being rejected, at that point, that is a sign of misplaced trust in our source of love. We learned in our root chakra that our reliance must shift towards sustainable systems. Okay, so if our reliance is upon ourselves, in the earth, in God, then we have already embodied the belief that we are taken care of. We know that we have these things that care for us and that we are loved. So we don't have to place that same trust and that same security in another person and in whether or not that person is going to accept our intimacy and our vulnerability. So at this point, intimacy becomes a practice. And we don't have to jump into the deep end. We can start small. We can practice intimacy through being present, through just being present, even in the mundane parts of our life, whether that is washing the dishes or taking care of someone we love, drawing a bath, whatever that is. Just being present in that moment makes it more intimate, and we start to practice that trust of being vulnerable, of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. So then in our relationships, we have this experience. We know and we trust this space of vulnerability. Intimacy also looks like sharing. Sharing space, sharing resources, allowing other people to be in life with us, sharing. I've had moments in my life where, metaphorically and literally, climbing to the top of a mountain, needing to see the peak, just needing to prove to myself that I could do something on my own, and being in these places in different parts of the world and wishing that someone else were there to experience it with me. That this deep longing and desire for intimacy. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of our lives. Like we said yesterday, we seek these external sources. We reach outward for things that we think will fulfill us. And what we're really experiencing as a human race is loneliness. Because we're not living our lives as intimately as we could, as intimately as our soul craves to be experiencing our lives. We need more than just a community and an identity to feel a part of. We need human connection. And I feel like that's why, I know that that's why this word is what has come through to me about the sacral chakra. Because here we are now in a world where we have been psychologically changed for the rest of our lives, maybe, because of this coronavirus, the fear of other people's germs. This can spiral. This could have an effect that will change what is intimate in our world. Our intimacy has to be protected. I was standing in a line recently in public where I was asked to step 6 feet away from my own husband. What kind of world are we creating? Are we really going to be afraid of physical touch, of intimacy, of true human connection? Are we going to live our lives on screens, sitting in our own rooms alone? I mean, I'm here alone. Even though I'm here with you all, I can't see you, I can't touch you, I can't smell you, I can't feel you. And this is only the beginning. So we have to protect our own intimacy. And a big piece of being in intimate spaces with people in physical space, the biggest thing that sets this experience apart from that experience is we are not alone here in this space. This is a recorded session. It is now owned by Instagram and whoever owns that, Facebook, right? And Google and all these things. We are always being exposed and exploited and watched. And I won't go much further into that because we'll talk about this next week when it comes to our own spiritual sovereignty and our power. We are the creators and the creatrixes of our lives. We determine where this shift will go. And so I wanted to talk about intimacy today to bring this back to light so that when you're voting and you're making choices and you're communicating with others and on social media, I want you to consider this piece, this intimate part of our experience. Our basic human needs are water, food, shelter, and intimacy. Human touch. I mean, there have been countless, trials and tests that have proven that babies that are held by their mothers, that are nurtured at a young age, develop on time, they thrive, there is a completely different quality of life experienced for those who are not touched and held and nurtured. I mean, we want to talk about mental illness in this country. Let's start with love and intimacy and touch and playfulness and laughter and honesty, all of these things that fall under this umbrella of intimacy, of the true human experience. In our relationships, in our families, intimacy has to be there. So, how can we invite more intimacy into our lives? What can we do? Well, that's a huge answer because relationships are complicated, we're complicated. I guess sophisticated is a better word for it, right? Every single relationship is different. There is no band-aid or fix-all for experiencing our lives more intimately. It's a practice. It shifts, it ebbs and flows. Because intimacy is experienced from our pelvic bowl, from our sacral space. And this space has to be nurtured and cared for. It's very, very delicate. And if you've taken my yoga classes before, we've talked about how the hips are a space. They love to collect all of our emotional intelligence. So things get stuck in there. It gets heavy, it gets tight, it gets confusing. And as we kind of comb through what's going on in our sacral chakra, we may become aware of grief and pain and kind of these heavier emotions, but our emotional intelligence is what makes us human. We are meant to move through our emotions, to feel them, to experience them intimately, to experience ourselves intimately, to experience others intimately. We live in a society full of addiction, of mental illness, of loneliness, of homelessness, of so much suffering. And I believe that if intimacy was a foundational piece of our society, if we were truly caring for ourselves and each other, we wouldn't have all of these issues and these problems. So some practices that you can begin with to begin to heal this sacred space and to experience our lives more intimately. First, a yoga practice is a beautiful way to do that, which I talked about before. Living more deeply within our own skin and feeling our body. In my yoga and journaling workshops, I talk about how we think with our entire bodies. Our mind exists in our fingers and our toes. So when we practice yoga and we use our body as a vehicle of understanding, we're able to experience our emotions more intimately. We are able to tap into this space of presence and awareness. Other ways, of course, are self-care practices. So drawing a bath, taking care of yourself, in whatever way, getting cozy with a blanket, reading a good book, going for a walk, whatever that looks like. But just nurturing and caring for ourselves naturally develops this relationship of intimacy. Then, of course, coming back around to our sexual relationships and our partners. Of course, this is a beautiful space, probably the most sacred space on our planet, are in these spaces of sexual intimacy, which, can feel very confusing for most people because of the confusing messages that our society sends us around sex and pleasure and orgasm. We're taught to not enjoy these things, or that they don't matter, or some religious beliefs are that they are sinful, and then we also live in this hypersexualized world. So I'm not going to go too much into that, but one thing I will share with you are a few books that have really helped me in that part of my life, as recreating sex and pleasure as a sacred space to connect with God and to connect with our partners. So, first of all, the Bible of my sacral chakra is Yoni Shakti. It's a big book full of amazing artwork and just knowledge, so much knowledge. There are even practices back here in the back where she shares, different yoga practices and things that you can do. Yoni Shakti basically translates to cunt power, which I love. She is a woman who has dedicated her entire life to collecting this information and writing this book. She basically said, I've been looking for this book my whole life. I couldn't find it, so I wrote it myself. And it really taps into the pelvic bowl, our sacred womb space. I love that you all are loving this right now. This book has just it's brought me so much joy finding it. She's a feminist. She has a great intellectual approach to the oppression of women's bodies, even in the world of yoga. Yoga was a practice that was only available to men for a very long time. And science is a practice that's only been available to men for a very long time. So a lot of things were left out of history, including our sacred womb space. So just educating ourselves on that and learning different ways to interact with our womb space will just open up portals of intimacy in our life. So Yoni Shakti, great book. She's also on Instagram. She has workshops, tons of stuff. Love her. This is an interesting book that I found. This session has officially turned into a book referral session, but I think you all will appreciate it, because there's just not a lot of information that we're just given freely in our lives around intimacy. So I've found that I really had to look for resources. Wild Feminine, I haven't finished this book yet. She dives right in. A lot of practices, actual practices to use, physical touch, massage, breath work, just really getting into the pelvic space and the sacredness of our bodies. The Magdalene manuscript. This is controversial, okay? But this book is a translation of the magical practices of Egyptian sex magic. There's really no other way to say it. Egyptian sex magic. A person who channels different spirit entities talked with Mary Magdalene. She shares her story and talks about how sacred sex is. I'll leave it at that. If you want to know more, message me, talk to me after this. Also, women's bodies, women's wisdom, just a Bible of biological things that we should know and understand about the imbalances in our bodies, especially when it comes to sexual health. So also a great Bible book to have at your house, just to always have access to that information. So there's a little bit of reading for you if you want to dive more intimately into your sacral chakra. And I also want to note, because I know that I have more than just women here on my feed. Men also have a sacred womb space. It's there. So, you know, tap into that. We would appreciate it as women if all men were more in tune with their sacred womb space. I think that the entire planet would just look completely different if we were thinking and feeling from this place of creativity. So, of course, moving on, the sacral chakra is our creative center. Not only where we create life, because that's where our sexual organs are, but it's where we express ourselves from. So I don't want to give you too much information here, but all of the chakras are working together in different ways, and they're basically connected. So we have our heart in the center, then we have like kind of like the throat and the sacral, we have the heart in the core chakra, we have the throat in the sacral, we have the third eye in the root chakra. So we have these chakras that are kind of connected with one another, and our sacral chakra is actually connected to our throat chakra. They work together. So when I talked about intimacy earlier, how communication is also an important part of intimacy. We have to be able to advocate for ourselves, especially in intimate spaces, in our relationships, in the bedroom, wherever it is that we're practicing intimacy. Communication is such an important part of that. So working with our throat chakra is also a way of exercising intimacy, or of expanding that within ourselves. Other ways to practice intimacy, of course, being playful, playing with our children, our pets, just going out and having fun, kind of like non-goal oriented fun, non-goal oriented play. So we live in a world that we feel like there always has to be a finish line or a reward for all that we're experiencing, and really, you know, there's so much intimacy to be experienced in just using your imagination and being playful and having open-ended play, whether that's with your partner or with your children or your friends, whatever it is you're doing. Just having like less rigidity and structure around your playfulness will promote more intimacy. And then, of course, leaning on others and showing up for others and being willing to have relationships in your life. I mean, we can only practice so much on our own. You know, for me on my spiritual path, for a long time, you know, I believed that I must be alone. I have to be selfish. This work is for me, and I just kind of need to get myself right. And that is totally an important part of everyone's process of healing and spiritual awakening. But at a certain point, I felt very complacent, like I had plateaued and I didn't really know where to go. And of course, that's where my husband enters into my story of my life. And being in a relationship and a partnership as sacred as our marriage has really given me just so many opportunities to practice intimacy, not only in the bedroom, but also through our communication and through our friendship and through the way that we choose to navigate the world together. Okay, so holding other people accountable, things of that nature, being willing to have the hard conversations. You know, we don't need any more superficial, hey, how are you? I'm good, good. We don't need any more of that. Like, there are so many important conversations that need to be had right now. So I really advocate and recommend that, you know, when you leave here today and you begin practicing intimacy, use your voice and don't be afraid to reach out to others and really share your feelings and what's going on with you right now, because the numbness and the disassociation is really the evil that we're against when it comes to the sacral chakra. So inviting people out of that numbness and saying, hey, it's okay to be afraid, I'm afraid too, or it's okay to feel, you know, stressed out, like I'm stressed out too, and just being in that space together and being intimate with one another will heal the sacral chakra, but also just the sacredness of our planet and just where we're at as a society right now. So I feel like that's everything I want to say today about that. Of course, there is still so much to be said, and I want to just reiterate that what I'm sharing about the sacral chakra, this is just one piece. Our chakra system is so sophisticated. It's full of so much wisdom, so much power. It could not just be talked about in a quick Instagram live session. However, intimacy is just one piece that I wanted to touch on with you all today. So I hope that you benefit from this conversation, and just remember that I am here for you. That's why I take the time to sit in front of a screen and just try to send a message out into the world so that you all know that I am here. I am feeling what you're feeling. I am also trying to figure this all out and just kind of stay involved and present. You know, I have Netflix as well, and I know how easy it is to just kind of check out and take a break from things, and that's important too. But, you know, practice that balance and make sure that you're also communicating with people and really staying present in your life and practicing intimacy. So thank you. That's all. Have a great day. Tomorrow I'll be back here talking about the solar plexus chakra and spiritual sovereignty. So I'll see you then.